Fear of failure isn't keeping you safe. It's keeping you broke. And if that statement landed heavy, it's because somewhere inside you already know it's true. You've felt it. That moment when opportunity knocked and you didn't answer. That idea you never pursued. That investment you researched for months but never made. That business you planned perfectly but never started. That conversation you never had. That risk you never took. And here's what nobody tells you about playing it safe. It has a price tag. A real one. Not theoretical. Not someday. Right now, today, every single day you let fear make your decisions for you. I've spent over 2 decades working with people who want to build wealth, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The fear of failure has cost more people more money than actual failure ever could. Because failure teaches. Failure builds. Failure moves you forward even when it knocks you down. But fear just keeps you exactly where you are while time and opportunity slip away. Most people think the opposite of failure is success. It's not. The opposite of failure is inaction. And inaction guarantees the one outcome nobody wants, staying stuck while watching others move ahead. You're not reading this because you don't know what to do. You know. You've probably known for a while. You're reading this because something inside you won't let you move, because the voice of "what if it doesn't work" is louder than the voice of "what if it does," because you've turned perfectionism into a prison and called it being careful. But here's what I've learned, watching thousands of people build real wealth. Not one of them waited until they were ready. Not one waited until the fear was gone. Not one had perfect information or guaranteed outcomes. They moved anyway. They calculated the risk. They learned from every step. And they built wealth not by avoiding failure, but by treating failure as data. This isn't going to be another pep talk about believing in yourself. This is about something more practical and more powerful. Over the next 90 minutes, you're going to learn a system, a real system for turning fear from a barrier into a tool. You're going to learn how to shift your entire relationship with risk, from how do I avoid losing, to what can I learn and earn from this action. We're going to talk about the real cost of perfectionism, not the inspirational poster version, the actual financial damage of waiting for conditions that never come. We're going to break down why your brain screams danger every time you consider a risk, and more importantly, how to speak a language your brain understands: data, evidence, calculated probability. You're going to learn to build what I call a calculated risk register, not a journal, not a vision board. A working document that turns every potential action into measurable opportunity. A system that makes risk concrete instead of terrifying. A framework that shifts your focus from avoiding failure to quantifying learning and wealth return. This works for everything: investing, business, career moves, income growth, building assets. Everything that matters in wealth building requires you to do something before you feel ready. And this system gives you a way to move forward even when the fear is still there. Because here's the truth, the fear doesn't go away, not completely. Everyone who's built something real still feels it. The difference is they don't let it decide. They feel the fear, they calculate the risk, they track the data, and they move. Your financial future is not waiting for you to feel brave. It's waiting for you to act smart, to stop letting perfect be the enemy of progress. To understand that the biggest risk isn't failure, it's never trying in the first place. Let me be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't about being reckless. This isn't about ignoring real risk or pretending consequences don't exist. This is about learning to evaluate risk accurately instead of letting fear inflate it. This is about building a track record of calculated decisions that prove to yourself you can handle uncertainty. This is about replacing emotional paralysis with practical systems. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by looking at exactly what fear of failure is costing you right now. Real money, real opportunity, real time. Then, we're going to rebuild your relationship with risk from the ground up, not by eliminating fear, but by giving you tools that work even when fear is present. By the end of this, you won't be fearless, but you will be free. Free to make the moves that build wealth, free to learn from every outcome, free to build a financial life that reflects your actual capability, not your comfort zone. Your financial future depends on this shift, not someday, today, right now. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The real cost of playing it safe. Here's something most people never calculate: the price of caution. They count the cost of taking risks. They imagine worst-case scenarios. They add up everything that could go wrong if they try something new. But they never, not once, sit down and calculate what their fear is actually costing them. Let me show you what I mean. You research an investment opportunity. Maybe it's a rental property, maybe it's index funds, maybe it's starting a side business. You spend weeks, maybe months, learning everything about it. You read articles, you watch videos, you talk to people who've done it, and then you wait. You wait for more information. You wait until you're more ready. You wait until the market seems safer. You wait until you have more certainty. And while you're waiting, two things happen. First, the opportunity cost starts accumulating. That money sitting in your savings account earning 0.5% interest could have been working for you. That business idea you researched, someone else with less knowledge but more courage just launched a similar version. That property you analyzed, it's sold to someone who didn't need perfect conditions to move. Second, and this is the part that really damages you, you reinforce the pattern. Every time you choose safety over calculated risk, you teach your brain that fear is the boss. You build a stronger habit of hesitation. You make the next decision even harder. I worked with a woman named Sarah, smart, hardworking, great income. She'd been researching real estate investing for 3 years. 3 years. She could tell you cap rates, cash-on-cash returns, neighborhood trends, property management strategies. She knew more than most people who already own rental properties, but she never bought one. Every time she got close, she found another reason to wait. The market might crash. She needed to save more for reserves. What if she got a bad tenant? What if the roof needed replacing? When we finally sat down and calculated the actual cost of those 3 years of hesitation, she went quiet. At the conservative returns she could have earned, and she knew the math because she'd done the research, her waiting had cost her over $45,000 in wealth building. Not potential gains from some risky venture, conservative, likely returns from properties well within her capability to manage. $45,000, the price of feeling safe. And here's what hit her hardest. In those 3 years, she'd experienced dozens of small failures in other areas of her life. A project at work that didn't go well, a relationship that ended, a fitness goal she didn't hit. Life gave her plenty of failure whether she took risks or not. The difference was those failures didn't build her wealth. They didn't teach her real estate investing. They didn't move her toward financial freedom. She'd paid the cost of failure without getting any of the benefits of trying. That's what happens when fear runs your financial life. You don't actually avoid pain. You just ensure the pain doesn't produce anything useful. Think about your own situation right now. What move have you been researching but not making? What opportunity have you been analyzing but not pursuing? What skill have you been planning to monetize but haven't started? Now, do this calculation. If you'd taken that action 1 year ago with reasonable precautions, where would you be today? What would you have learned? What would you have built? What return would you have generated, or what income would you have created? Be specific. Put numbers to it, because vague fear stays powerful. But when you make the cost of inaction concrete, something shifts. Most people overestimate the risk of action and completely ignore the risk of inaction. They see failure as the worst outcome, when really the worst outcome is never trying and watching years pass while your financial situation stays exactly the same. Here's what playing it safe actually costs you. First, there's the direct financial cost. Money that could be growing sits idle. Income you could be generating never materializes. Assets you could own remain in someone else's portfolio. This compounds over time. Not just the missed returns, but the missed returns on those returns. Second, there's the learning cost. Every calculated risk you don't take is a lesson you don't learn when you finally do act, and you will eventually, because staying stuck becomes unbearable, you'll still be a beginner. You'll have no track record, no experience making decisions under real conditions. No proof to yourself that you can handle challenges. People who take calculated risks early don't just build wealth faster. They build the skills and confidence that make later risks easier and more likely to succeed. They develop judgment. They learn to read situations. They discover they're more capable than they thought. That capability is worth more than any single investment return. Third, there's the identity cost. Every time you choose safety, you reinforce a self-image of someone who doesn't take action. You're telling yourself a story. I'm not the kind of person who does bold things. That story becomes self-fulfilling. It shapes every future decision. It limits what you even consider possible. The longer this goes on, the more calcified it becomes. I've met people in their 50s and 60s who spent their entire careers being careful, being responsible, being safe, and they're not wealthy. They're not secure. They're just behind. Watching people with less education and less initial advantage pull ahead because those people were willing to try, fail, learn, and try again. Fourth, there's the opportunity cost of time. You're not getting younger. The years you have to build wealth are finite. Every year spent in analysis paralysis is a year you can't get back. Compound interest needs time. Business growth needs time. Skill development needs time. The cost of delay isn't just what you miss now. It's what you could have built if you'd started earlier. But here's what makes this truly expensive. You're already taking risks. You just don't realize it. You're risking that your job will be there next year. You're risking that your skills will stay relevant. You're risking that inflation won't erode your savings. You're risking that nothing will disrupt your steady path. Those are risks, real ones. You're just not in control of them. When you take a calculated risk, when you invest, when you start something, when you make a strategic career move, you're actually gaining control. You're shifting from passive risk to active risk. From hoping nothing bad happens to building something that can weather the bad when it comes. The person who owns rental properties, has multiple income streams, and has built real skills in wealth creation. They're in a stronger position than the person with a safe job and money in a savings account. Not because they took crazy chances, but because they took smart, calculated actions that most people avoid. And here's something else most people miss. What you call playing it safe isn't actually safe for your peace of mind. The stress of wondering, what if I'd tried, doesn't go away. The regret of looking back and seeing a flat line where there could have been growth, that's not peaceful. The fear that you've wasted time you can't recover, that keeps people up at night. Real security doesn't come from avoiding risk. It comes from developing the capability to handle whatever comes. And you only build that capability by taking action, learning from the results, and taking the next action. So let's be honest about what's really happening when you delay. You're not being careful. You're not being responsible. You're not being wise. You're being afraid. And you're letting that fear make financial decisions for you. The question isn't whether fear of failure is costing you. It is. The question is whether you're ready to calculate that cost accurately and decide if you want to keep paying it, because every day you wait, the price goes up. Not dramatically, not in a way that creates urgency, just steadily, quietly, compoundingly, until one day you look back and realize you bought safety and all you got was stuck. That's the real cost of playing it safe. Not the dramatic failure you feared, the slow erosion of the future you could have built. Chapter 2. Why your brain treats opportunity like danger. Your brain is trying to protect you. That's what you need to understand first. When opportunity shows up and your stomach tightens, when you think about taking action and anxiety floods in, when you start finding reasons to delay, your brain isn't working against you. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is, it was designed for a different world. Your brain evolved in an environment where risk usually meant physical danger. A rustle in the bushes could be a predator. An unfamiliar food could be poison. Trusting the wrong person could get you killed. So your brain developed a simple, powerful rule. When uncertain, assume danger. Better to run from 100 false alarms than miss one real threat. That kept your ancestors alive, but it's keeping you broke. Because in the modern world, Especially in financial decisions, the real danger often looks safe, and real opportunity often triggers fear. Your brain can't tell the difference between this investment might not work out and this predator might eat you. Both fire the same alarm system. Both flood you with the same chemicals that say, stop, retreat, stay where you are. Let me break down what's actually happening in your head when you face a financial opportunity. First, there's the amygdala. This is your brain's threat detection system. It's fast, powerful, and it doesn't do nuance. It sees anything uncertain as potentially dangerous. When you think about investing money, starting a business, or making a career move, your amygdala lights up like you're about to step off a cliff. It doesn't matter that the actual risk is small. It doesn't matter that you've done your research. It doesn't matter that failure wouldn't actually harm you. Your amygdala doesn't care about reality. It cares about uncertainty, and any uncertain outcome gets tagged as threat. Second, there's loss aversion. Your brain is wired to feel losses about twice as strongly as gains. Losing 1,000 hurts more than gaining 1,000 feels good. This made sense when resources were scarce and losing food meant potentially starving. But in modern wealth building, it creates a massive bias toward inaction. When you consider an investment, your brain automatically focuses on what you could lose. It imagines that money disappearing. It feels that loss vividly. But the potential gain? That's abstract, uncertain. Your brain can't feel it the same way. So even when the math clearly favors taking action, your emotional system screams no. Third, there's status quo bias. Your brain loves consistency. It wants tomorrow to look like today. Change requires energy, creates uncertainty, and could go wrong. So your brain generates powerful emotional resistance to anything that disrupts your current state. This is why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that don't work, and financial situations that limit them. Not because change is impossible, but because their brain treats the current state, even a bad one, as safer than an unknown state, even a potentially better one. Fourth, there's the spotlight effect. You overestimate how much others notice your actions and judge your failures. Your brain assumes that if you try something and fail, everyone will see it, remember it, and think less of you. In reality, most people are too focused on their own lives to spend much time thinking about your setbacks. But this fear of social judgment adds another layer to the fear of failure. It's not just, what if I lose money? It's, what if I lose money and everyone knows? That double fear can paralyze you completely. Fifth, there's what psychologists call the planning fallacy. You underestimate how long things take and how much effort they require. So when you think about starting something new, your brain imagines all the work, all the challenges, all the time required, and that overwhelming mental picture triggers avoidance. What your brain doesn't show you is that same mental movie for staying where you are. It doesn't calculate the years of stagnation, the accumulating frustration, the compounding opportunity cost. Those costs are slow and gradual, so they don't trigger the same alarm. Here's what all this means. Your emotional reaction to risk is not an accurate assessment of actual danger. It's an evolutionary hangover. Your fear response is set to maximum sensitivity to protect you from threats that mostly don't exist anymore, while being nearly blind to modern risks like financial stagnation and missed opportunity. You cannot trust your gut when it comes to calculated financial risk. Your gut is calibrated wrong. I know that's hard to hear. We're taught to trust our instincts. Listen to your inner voice. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. That advice works great for personal relationships and immediate physical safety. It's terrible for wealth building. The people who build wealth learn to recognize fear as information, not instruction. They feel the anxiety, acknowledge it, and then look past it to evaluate the actual risk. They understand that the intensity of fear doesn't correlate with the level of actual danger. Think about the first time you drove a car. Remember how terrifying that felt? Your hands were probably sweating, your heart was probably racing, every small action felt dangerous. But was it actually as dangerous as it felt? No. Millions of people drive safely every day. The fear was real, but it was based on unfamiliarity, not actual threat. Now think about how you feel driving today. probably calm. Maybe you even enjoy it. The objective risk hasn't changed. Car accidents are still possible. But your brain has learned this is a manageable activity. The fear faded with experience. That's what happens with calculated financial risk. The first investment feels terrifying. Starting a business feels overwhelming. Making a bold career move feels dangerous. But once you've done it, once you've learned you can handle the uncertainty and manage the outcomes, the fear shrinks. Not because the risk disappeared, but because your brain updated its threat assessment based on real data. But here's the key. You can't wait for the fear to go away before you act. The fear goes away because you act. That's the sequence. Action first, comfort later, never the reverse. Your brain is also terrible at probability. It treats a 1% chance of something bad like it's a 50% chance. It focuses on the vividness of the bad outcome, not the likelihood. This is why people fear plane crashes more than car accidents, even though cars are statistically far more dangerous. The plane crash is dramatic, memorable, scary. The car accident is familiar, forgettable, mundane. Same thing happens with financial decisions. People fear losing money in the stock market more than losing money to inflation. They fear the dramatic, visible loss more than the slow, invisible erosion. But inflation is guaranteed. Market participation has historically built wealth, yet fear pushes them toward the objectively worst choice. You also have to understand the difference between uncertainty and risk. They're not the same thing. Uncertainty means you don't know what will happen. Risk means something bad could happen. They overlap, but they're different. Your brain treats all uncertainty as high risk, but many uncertain situations are low risk. You don't know exactly how your investment will perform, but the historical data shows strong long-term returns. You don't know exactly how your business will grow, but you've tested the model and know there's demand. Uncertainty exists, but the actual risk is manageable. When you can separate these, when you can look at an uncertain situation and evaluate the actual risk, you make better decisions. You stop avoiding everything that feels uncomfortable and start distinguishing between smart risks and dumb risks. Here's another thing your brain does. It creates false patterns. You tried something once and it didn't work, so your brain tags that entire category as dangerous. You had one bad investment, so investing feels scary. You started one business that failed, so starting businesses feels impossible. But one data point doesn't make a pattern, one outcome doesn't define a category. Your brain doesn't know this. It's trying to keep you alive, not make you wealthy, so it overgeneralizes from limited information. The people who build wealth understand this. They don't let one failure define a whole category of action. They learn from what went wrong, adjust, and try again. They accumulate real data instead of letting their brain extrapolate fear from isolated events. So what do you do with all this? How do you move forward when your brain is screaming danger at every opportunity? You don't ignore your brain. You can't. But you don't obey it either. You learn to work with it in a smarter way. You acknowledge the fear. You say, yes, this feels scary. That's my amygdala doing its job. You don't fight the feeling. Fighting it gives it more power. You just recognize it for what it is, an outdated alarm system giving you information that isn't actually relevant to modern financial decisions. Then you switch to a different part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part that does analysis, planning, rational evaluation. You ask different questions. Not, how do I feel about this? But what does the data show? What's the actual probability of failure? What's the actual cost if it doesn't work? What's the cost of not trying? You force your analytical brain to do its job while your emotional brain is still firing alarms. Both can exist at the same time. You don't need the fear to stop. You just need to make decisions based on logic while fear's present. This is the skill that separates people who build wealth from people who stay stuck. Not fearlessness, the ability to act logically while feeling fear. And here's the most important part. Every time you do this, every time you take a calculated action despite fear and nothing terrible happens, you reprogram your brain a little bit. You give it new data. You show it that this category of action is safe enough. Over time, the fear response weakens. Not completely, but enough that it stops controlling you. Your brain isn't your enemy. It's just not equipped for modern wealth building. Once you understand that, once you stop treating fear as truth and start treating it as one input among many, you can finally start making the moves that build real financial security. The opportunity looks like danger, but it's not. Your brain just can't tell the difference. You have to teach it, and you teach it by moving forward despite the alarm, by collecting real evidence, by building a track record that overwrites the false warnings. That's how you stop letting biology run your finances. That's how you start making decisions that actually serve your future instead of your caveman instincts. Chapter 3. Perfectionism is expensive procrastination. Let's call this what it really is. When you say you're waiting until you know more, until you're more prepared, until conditions are better, that's not diligence. That's not being responsible. That's procrastination wearing a suit and tie. Perfectionism isn't a virtue. It's a defense mechanism, and it's one of the most expensive habits you can have. I need to be clear about something up front. There's a difference between being thorough and being perfectionist. Thorough means you do your research, you prepare reasonably, and then you move. Perfectionist means you never feel ready, you keep finding new things to learn, and you never actually move. Thorough builds wealth. Perfectionism prevents it. The perfectionist thinks they're being smart. They think they're avoiding mistakes. They tell themselves they're just being careful, being prudent, being strategic. But what they're really doing is creating an impossible standard that guarantees they never have to face the discomfort of action. Because here's the thing about perfectionism. It's not really about the outcome. It's about the identity. The perfectionist doesn't want to be someone who makes mistakes, doesn't want to be someone who tries and fails, doesn't want to risk looking foolish or incompetent or ordinary. So they set the bar so high that failure is impossible, because trying is impossible. They protect their self-image by never putting it to the test, and they pay for that protection with their financial future. Think about what perfectionism actually requires. Perfect information, perfect conditions, perfect timing, perfect preparation, perfect confidence. None of those things exist, ever, for anyone, which means if you wait for perfect, you wait forever. I've watched this play out hundreds of times. Someone wants to invest. They start researching and researching and researching. They read books. They watch videos. They follow markets. They analyze properties or stocks or businesses. They become experts on the theoretical side, but they never invest. Because they haven't learned everything, because the market might turn, because they might pick wrong, because what if there's something they don't know that they don't know? And while they're perfecting their knowledge, inflation is eating their savings. Compound interest is working for everyone except them. Opportunities are being taken by people with less knowledge but more courage. Here's what perfectionism costs you in concrete terms. First, there's the direct opportunity cost. Every month you delay is a month of potential returns you'll never get back. If you're researching real estate investing for 2 years instead of buying a property after 6 months of reasonable research, you've lost 18 months of rental income, appreciation, and equity building. That's real money. Not theoretical. Not maybe. That's cash that could have been in your pocket. Second, there's the learning cost. You can read 100 books about investing, but you'll learn more from managing one actual investment for 6 months than from all those books combined. Real-world experience teaches things theory can't. Market dynamics, human behavior, your own reactions under pressure, problem-solving in actual situations. The perfectionist thinks they're reducing risk by learning more first, but they're actually increasing risk by delaying real experience. When they finally do act, they're still beginners. They've just spent more time being beginners. Third, there's the compound effect. This is the killer. Because every financial decision isn't just about that decision. It's about what that decision teaches you, what it builds, what opportunities it creates for the next decision. The person who starts investing earlier makes mistakes earlier. They learn from those mistakes earlier. They adjust earlier. And that earlier learning compounds just like money does. They get better faster. They make smarter decisions faster. They build wealth faster, not because they're smarter, but because they started learning when the perfectionist was still planning. Fourth, There's the confidence cost. Every time you tell yourself you're not ready, you reinforce a belief about yourself. I'm not the kind of person who takes action. That belief gets stronger with repetition. It doesn't just apply to that one decision. It shapes how you approach everything. The longer perfectionism runs your life, the more entrenched it becomes. You develop an identity as someone who prepares but doesn't execute, someone who thinks but doesn't do, someone who plans but doesn't build. That identity follows you everywhere. Fifth, and this is the one people never calculate, perfectionism costs you mentally and emotionally. The constant research without action, the endless preparation without progress, the feeling of being stuck while claiming you're being careful, that wears you down. You start feeling fraudulent. You're talking about investing or starting a business or making a move, but you're not actually doing it. You know you're avoiding. You know the research is becoming an excuse. That internal conflict creates stress, guilt, and eventually resentment at yourself, at your situation, at everyone who's moving ahead while you're stuck in analysis. Here's what most perfectionists don't realize. The fear of imperfect action is actually worse than imperfect action itself. When you take action, even imperfect action, you get feedback. Real information. You learn what works and what doesn't. You adjust. You improve. You gain experience. Even if things don't go perfectly, and they won't, you're moving forward. You're building something. But when you delay because it's not perfect, you get nothing. No feedback, no learning, no experience, no progress. Just more time to imagine everything that could go wrong and convince yourself you need to prepare more. The imperfect action, even if it leads to a setback, at least produces something. The perfectionism produces nothing except lost time and reinforced fear. I'll tell you something else about perfectionists that might be uncomfortable to hear. Perfectionism is often hiding arrogance, not the obvious kind, the subtle kind, the belief that you should be able to do something perfectly the first time, that you shouldn't have to struggle or make mistakes like everyone else. But everyone else did struggle. Everyone else did make mistakes. That's how skill is built. That's how success happens. Messy, imperfect, mistake-filled action followed by learning and adjustment. The perfectionist wants to skip that process, wants to show up already excellent. But that's not how it works. You don't get to bypass the learning curve. You just get to choose whether you start it now or keep delaying. Here's a test. Think about something you've been researching or planning for more than 3 months. Ask yourself honestly, do you need more information? Or do you already know enough to start? If you're truly missing critical knowledge, you don't understand the basics, you haven't figured out the fundamentals, then yes, keep learning. But if you're looking for that last bit of certainty, that final piece that will make you feel ready, stop. You're not going to find it, because it doesn't exist. You already know enough to take a small step, not the whole journey, not the complete plan, just one manageable step. And you're choosing not to because it's not perfect, because you might do it wrong, because you might learn you're not as capable as you imagined. But here's the freedom. You're probably not as capable as you imagined. Not yet. Nobody is when they start. Capability is built through doing, not through preparing to do. The people who become capable are the ones who started before they felt ready and learned as they went. So what does this mean practically? It means you set a deadline for research and planning. You give yourself a reasonable time to learn the basics, maybe 1 month, maybe 3, and then you commit to action. Not perfect action, just action. It means you accept that your first attempt will be flawed. You're not aiming for flawless, you're aiming for started. You can fix flawed. You can improve starting. You can't do anything with perfect planning that never turns into reality. It means you redefine success. Success isn't getting it right the first time. Success is taking action, learning from it, and taking the next action informed by what you learned. That's the real metric, not perfection, progress. It means you give yourself permission to be mediocre at first, to be a beginner, to not know everything, to make mistakes that could have been avoided with more preparation. Because the alternative, never starting, is far worse than any mistake you'll make along the way. And it means you recognize that perfectionism is actually maximizing your risk, not minimizing it. Because the biggest risk isn't making a wrong move. It's making no move and staying exactly where you are while time runs out. Look, I understand the appeal of perfectionism. It feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like you're being smart. But feelings and reality don't always match. The reality is that perfectionism is expensive, it's paralyzing, and it's a guarantee that you'll never build what you're capable of building. You don't need perfect. You need good enough plus action, good enough research plus real-world testing, good enough preparation plus willingness to learn as you go. Good enough plan plus flexibility to adjust. That's how wealth is built, not by people who waited until everything was perfect, by people who moved when conditions were good enough and figured out the rest along the way. The perfectionism has to stop. Not because it's a character flaw, because it's a financial liability you can't afford. Chapter 4. Introducing the calculated risk. Register. All right, we've talked about the problem. We've looked at what fear costs, how your brain works, why perfectionism keeps you stuck. Now let's talk about the solution, the actual system that changes everything. I call it the calculated risk register. And I need you to understand right from the start, this is not a journal. It's not a motivational tool. It's not something you do once and forget about. This is a working business document that treats your personal financial decisions with the same rigor that successful companies use when evaluating opportunities. Here's the core concept. Every potential action gets documented, evaluated, and tracked. You write down what you're considering, what you could gain, what you could lose, what you'll learn regardless of outcome, and what success actually looks like. Then you make a decision based on data, not emotion. And afterward, you track what actually happened and what you learned. This does 3 things that change everything. First, it makes risk concrete instead of abstract. When risk lives in your head, your brain inflates it, makes it bigger, scarier, more dangerous than it actually is. But when you write it down, when you quantify it, when you turn vague fear into specific numbers and outcomes, something shifts. The fear loses power because you're dealing with reality instead of imagination. Second, it creates accountability, not to someone else, to yourself. When you document what you're considering and why, when you put your analysis in writing, you can't lie to yourself as easily. You can't pretend you need more information when you've already answered the key questions. You either move forward or you acknowledge you're choosing fear over opportunity. Third, and this is the big one, it shifts your focus from avoiding failure to maximizing learning and potential return. Every entry in your register becomes a data point, a piece of evidence, proof of what works, what doesn't, and what you're learning. Over time, you build a track record that shows you exactly how your decisions play out, and that track record rewrites your relationship with risk. Let me walk you through how this actually works. The entry process. When you're considering any action, and I mean anything that involves financial risk or opportunity, you create an entry in your register. This can be a document, a spreadsheet, a dedicated notebook. Format doesn't matter. What matters is that it's organized and you actually use it. Each entry has several sections. You fill these out before you make your decision. This is crucial. You're creating your assessment while the decision is still in front of you, not after. Section 1. The opportunity. Write down what you're considering. Be specific. Not, maybe I should invest, but I'm considering putting $5,000 into a total stock market index fund through Vanguard. Not, I might start a business, but I'm considering starting a freelance consulting practice focused on specific skill for specific market. The specificity matters because vague opportunities create vague analysis, and vague analysis leads to vague decisions, which usually means no decisions. Section 2. Potential upside. This is where you document what you could gain if things go well. And I want you to think about this in multiple dimensions, not just financial. Financial gain. What's the realistic best-case return? Not fantasy numbers, conservative estimates based on research. For an investment, what's the historical average return? For a business, what's reasonable revenue based on your market research? For a career move, what's the likely income increase? Learning gain. What will you learn by taking this action? This is huge. Even if the financial outcome is disappointing, what knowledge and experience will you gain? How will this make you smarter, more capable, more prepared for the next opportunity? Network gain. Will this action connect you with new people, new opportunities, new relationships? Does it expand your professional or financial community? Confidence. Gain. How will successfully executing this decision affect your self-belief? How will it change what you think you're capable of? Write all of this down. Make it real. Because one of the tricks your brain plays is that it makes potential gains feel abstract while making potential losses feel concrete. This evens the playing field. Section 3. Potential downside. Now document what you could lose, but here's the key. You're not imagining worst-case scenarios. You're assessing realistic negative outcomes. Financial risk. What's the actual maximum you could lose? Not theoretical. Actual. If you're investing $5,000, the absolute maximum loss is $5,000. Not your house, not your future. $5,000. If you're starting a side business with $2,000 in startup costs, that's your downside. Name it specifically. Time investment. How much time will this require? Be honest, this is a real cost, but also be realistic. Don't inflate it to create an excuse. Opportunity cost. What else could you do with these resources? This matters because you're not just evaluating this action in a vacuum, you're choosing it over alternatives. Reputation risk. Is there any actual risk to your reputation if this doesn't work? Usually the answer is no or very minimal, but if there is real reputational risk, name it clearly. Stress impact. Will taking this action create meaningful stress? How will you manage it? Again, write this all down. Make it specific. Make it real. Because when you do this, you almost always discover the downside is smaller than your fear made it seem. Section 4. Success criteria. This is where most people fail. They take action without defining what success looks like. So they don't know if they succeeded. They can't learn from outcomes because they never established clear metrics. Define success for this specific action. What needs to happen for you to consider this a win? And I want you to create multiple levels. Minimum success. What's the baseline outcome that makes this worthwhile? Maybe for an investment, it's doesn't lose money. Maybe for a business, it's generates enough revenue to cover costs and teach me the fundamentals. Target success. What's the outcome you're actually aiming for? The realistic goal. This should be achievable, but require solid execution. Exceptional success. What would exceeding expectations look like? This is your stretch goal. Having these levels matters because it helps you evaluate outcomes accurately. You're not just asking, did I succeed? You're asking, how close did I get to each level, and what does that tell me? Section 5. Key assumptions. Write down what you're assuming will be true for this to work. What are you betting on? What conditions need to exist? This matters because when you review the outcome, you'll need to know which assumptions held and which didn't. That's where the learning happens. You don't just find out if something worked. You find out why it worked or didn't work. Section 6. The decision. Now you make a call. Based on everything you've documented, are you moving forward or not? If yes, write down your commitment. I am taking this action. Here's when I'll start. Here's my timeline. Here's how I'll know if I need to adjust. If no, write down why. Be honest. Is it because the risk truly outweighs the potential return based on your analysis? Or is it because you're afraid? There's a difference. One is wisdom. One is fear-winning. If it's fear, acknowledge that. Write it down. I'm not moving forward even though the analysis supports it because I'm afraid of X. That honesty matters because when you see that pattern repeat in multiple entries, you'll recognize what's really stopping you. The review process. Here's where the magic happens. After you take action, or after you choose not to, you come back to the entry and document what actually happened. What was the outcome? Financially, what did you gain or lose? What did you learn? What surprised you? What would you do differently? Which assumptions held, which didn't? This is not about judging yourself. It's about collecting data, real, honest data about how your decisions play out in reality. And here's what you'll discover when you do this consistently. Your fear was almost always bigger than the actual risk. The downside wasn't as bad as you imagined. The upside was often better than expected. And even when things didn't go perfectly, you learned something valuable that makes the next decision easier. That accumulated evidence changes you. It rewrites the fear response, because now when your brain starts screaming about danger, you have proof. Real proof from your own experience that calculated risk is manageable, that you can handle challenges, that you learn and grow from every action regardless of outcome. The power of the pattern. One entry won't change your life, but 10 entries will start to show you patterns. 20 entries will reveal how you make decisions. 50 entries will give you a track record that serves as evidence against fear. You'll see that most of the things you worried about didn't happen. You'll see that the actions you took, even when they didn't produce perfect outcomes, moved you forward. You'll see yourself getting better at evaluating risk, at executing plans, at learning from results. And that evidence you created, evidence you can point to, becomes more powerful than any motivational speech or mindset shift. Because it's real, it's yours. It's proof that you're capable of more than fear tells you. This is how you turn fear from a barrier into information. This is how you shift from reactive decision-making to strategic wealth building. This is how you finally start making the moves that build financial security instead of staying stuck in the same patterns that keep you behind. The calculated risk register isn't complicated, but it's powerful. Because it does what fear can't stand. It brings clarity, measurement, and evidence to situations that fear wants to keep vague and terrifying. Next, we're going to talk about how to actually make your first entry and take your first calculated risk. But before we move on, I want you to think about one action you've been considering. Just one. Keep it in your mind. Because you're about to turn that vague consideration into a documented, evaluated decision. Chapter 5. Your first calculated risk. Let's make this real. Not someday. Not after you finish this audiobook, right now. By the end of this chapter, you're going to have documented your first calculated risk. You're going to have a complete entry in your register. And you're going to have a clear decision about whether you're moving forward. This is where everything changes. Not because one entry solves everything, because one entry proves you can do this. And once you prove it once, the second one is easier, then the third. Then it becomes your new operating system. But you have to start, and you have to start with something real. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through creating an actual entry together. I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them, out loud if you can. Write them down if possible. But don't skip this. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later. Later becomes never. Do it now. Choosing your first risk. First, you need to choose what you're evaluating. And this matters. You don't want to start with something too big or too small. Too big and the fear will overwhelm the process. Too small and it won't feel meaningful enough to overcome your resistance to this new system. You want something that matters to you financially, that you've been considering for a while, and that has clear enough parameters that you can actually analyze it. Some good examples: investing a specific amount in index funds, starting a side income project you've been researching, taking a course or getting a certification that could increase your earning potential, making a career move to a higher paying position, buying a rental property, starting a small business, negotiating a raise. What's yours? What's the one thing you've been thinking about but haven't done? Got it? Good. Write it down at the top of a page or document. Make it specific. Include numbers, timelines, concrete details. Not maybe invest, but invest $3,000 into Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund this month. Not start a business, but launch a weekend consulting service helping specific type of client with specific problem, starting with a test period of 3 months and a $500 marketing budget. Specificity creates clarity. Clarity enables decision-making. Documenting the upside now. What do you gain if this works? Start with money. What's the realistic financial upside? Don't give me best-case fantasies. Give me conservative, reasonable estimates based on research or historical data. If it's an investment, what's the historical average return for this asset class? If it's a business or side income, what's reasonable revenue based on your market research and time commitment? If it's a career move, what's the salary increase? Write that number down. Now, what else do you gain? What will you learn? And be specific. I'll learn how markets work is vague. I'll learn how to manage emotions during market volatility, how to rebalance a portfolio, and how investment accounts actually function is specific. What relationships or connections might this create? Will this put you in contact with people who could help your future financial moves? How will this change your self-concept? Will executing this decision prove something to yourself? Will it break a pattern of hesitation? Will it make you someone who takes action instead of someone who thinks about it? Write all of this down. Make the upside as real and concrete as you can. Your brain needs to see this clearly, because right now it's probably very clear about the downside and very vague about the upside. Documenting the downside, now the other side. What could go wrong? What's the maximum financial loss? Not theoretical, actual. If you're investing $3,000, the absolute maximum loss is $3,000, not a penny more. You're not going to lose your house over a $3,000 investment. You're not going to ruin your life. Maximum loss, $3,000. If you're starting a business with a $500 marketing budget, maximum loss, $500 plus your time. Write down the real number, the actual maximum possible financial loss. Now, how much time will this take? Be honest but realistic. Don't inflate the time requirement to create an excuse. If something will take 3 hours a week, it takes 3 hours a week. That's the cost. Write it down. What's the opportunity cost? What else could you do with this money or time? This matters because you're choosing. If you invest the $3,000, you can't also spend it on something else. If you spend 3 hours a week on a side business, you can't spend those hours doing something else. What are you giving up? Is there any real reputation risk? Usually the answer is no. Usually the only people who will know if something doesn't work are you and maybe a few close people. But if there is real reputational risk, name it clearly. What stress might this create, and how will you manage it? Don't pretend there's no stress, but don't inflate it either. Name it realistically and plan for it. Write all this down. Make the downside as specific as the upside, because vague downside feeds fear. Specific downside enables rational evaluation. Defining success. Now, what does success look like? And I want 3 levels. Minimum success, what's the baseline? The minimum outcome that makes this worthwhile? For an investment, maybe it's, I learn how to invest and don't panic sell. For a side business, maybe it's, I get one paying client and learn the basics of running a business. For a career move, maybe it's, I successfully transition and maintain my current standard of living. Write down your minimum success criteria. Target success. What are you actually aiming for? For an investment, maybe it's, I earn the historical average return and build confidence in market investing. For a side business, maybe it's, I generate $500 in monthly revenue within 6 months. For a career move, maybe it's, I increase my income by $10,000 annually. Write down your target. Exceptional success. What would exceeding expectations look like? Don't be shy here. What's the stretch goal? The outcome that would make you genuinely proud. Write it down. Having these 3 levels matters because it gives you a framework for evaluation. You're not asking, did this work or fail? You're asking, how did this perform against my expectations and what does that tell me? Naming your assumptions. What are you assuming has to be true for this to work? For an investment, maybe you're assuming markets behave roughly like they have historically. Maybe you're assuming you can handle seeing your account balance fluctuate without panic. For a side business, maybe you're assuming there's real demand for your service. Maybe you're assuming you can carve out the time. Maybe you're assuming you have the skills or can learn them. For a career move, maybe you're assuming the new company is stable. Maybe you're assuming you can perform at the level they expect. Write down your key assumptions. 4 or 5 is usually enough. These will be important later when you're reviewing outcomes because they'll tell you which of your assumptions held and which didn't. Making the decision. Now you decide. Based on everything you've documented, the upside, the downside, the success criteria, the assumptions, are you moving forward or not? This is where honesty matters. If the analysis shows the upside significantly outweighs the downside, if the risk is actually manageable, if success is clearly defined and achievable, then the rational answer is yes. But maybe you're still feeling fear. That's normal. The question is, are you going to let fear decide? If you're moving forward, write down your commitment. I am taking this action. I will, specific first step by specific date. I will track progress, how you'll track. I will review results in time frame. If you're not moving forward, write down why. And be honest. Is it because the risk truly outweighs the return? Or is it because you're afraid? If it's fear, write that down. The analysis supports moving forward, but I'm choosing not to because I'm afraid of specific fear. That honesty is crucial. Because when you see that pattern, analysis says yes, fear says no, you choose no, you'll start to recognize what's really running your financial life. Taking the first action. If you decided to move forward, your next step is immediate, not tomorrow, not next week. What's the very first micro step you can take right now? For the investment, maybe it's opening the brokerage account. For the side business, maybe it's creating a basic service offering document. For the career move, maybe it's updating your resume. Whatever it is, it should be something you can do in the next 24 hours. Something small but concrete, something that commits you to motion. Write down that first action, and when you'll complete it, then do it. What happens next? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to feel fear. Maybe a lot of it. That's normal. Your brain is going to offer you reasons to delay, to reconsider, to wait a little longer. Don't negotiate. You've done the analysis. You've made the decision based on data. Trust the process. Take that. First step. Then the next. Follow through on your commitment. And then, and this is crucial, come back to your register in 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on your timeline, and document what actually happened. What was the outcome? What did you learn? What surprised you? Which assumptions held? Which didn't? What would you do differently? That review is where the transformation happens. Because that's where you'll see that the fear was bigger than the reality. That's where you'll see what you're actually capable of. That's where you'll gather evidence that rewrites your relationship with risk. The reality of first risks. I'll tell you something. Your first calculated risk probably won't be your best move. It might work well. It might not. That's not the point. The point is, you're building a new pattern. You're proving you can analyze risk, make a decision, and take action. You're collecting your first data point. You're starting to build evidence that calculated risk is manageable. That matters more than the specific outcome of this one decision. But here's what I've seen happen hundreds of times. People take their first calculated risk, document it, follow through, and then review the results. And even when the outcome isn't perfect, they realize something important. They survived, they learned, they grew. And the thing they were afraid of? Either it didn't happen or it wasn't as bad as they feared. That realization changes everything. Because now they have proof, real proof from their own experience, not theory, not someone else's story, their own data. And with that proof, the second calculated risk is easier, then the third. Then it becomes normal. Then they look back 6 months later and realize they've taken 10 calculated risks, learned from all of them, and moved their financial life forward more in those 6 months than in the previous 2 years. That's the power of this system. Not magic. Just consistent application of rational analysis, followed by action, followed by learning. But it starts with one entry, one documented decision, one action taken despite fear. So here's my question. Did you actually do this? Did you create your first entry? Did you make your decision? Did you identify your first action? If not, stop. Go back. Do it now. This isn't optional if you want things to change. This is how change starts, not by understanding the system, by using it. Your first calculated risk is waiting. Document it. Decide on it. Take the first step. That's how you overcome the fear of failure, not by eliminating fear, by acting despite it, tracking what happens, and building evidence that fear doesn't control your financial future. You do. Chapter 6. Reframing failure. As expensive data, failure isn't the problem. Your relationship with failure is the problem. And I need you to hear this clearly. Every successful person you admire has failed more times than most people have tried. That's not motivational fluff, that's mathematics. More attempts means more failures and more learning, which leads to more eventual success. The difference between people who build wealth and people who stay stuck isn't that wealthy people don't fail. It's that they treat failure as information instead of identity. When something doesn't work out, they don't ask, "What's wrong with me?" They ask, "What did I learn?" They don't spiral into self-doubt. They extract the lesson, adjust their approach, and try again. That mindset shift, from failure as judgment to failure as data, is worth more than any investment strategy or business tactic. Because once you make that shift, you become unstoppable. Not fearless, unstoppable. There's a difference. Let me show you what I mean. The real cost of failed actions. When you take a calculated risk and it doesn't work out, you pay a price. That's true. But let's be accurate about what that price actually is. There's the financial cost, the money you invested or spent. That's real. That's measurable. And if you did your job during the risk calculation, you already knew the maximum possible loss before you started. There's the time cost, the hours you put in. Also real, also measurable. And again, you should have estimated this during your planning. But here's what most people don't realize. Those costs bought you something. They bought you information. They bought you experience. They bought you proof that you can try something uncertain and survive the outcome even when it's not what you hoped. That's not worthless. That's expensive data, and it's valuable. Think about it this way. Companies spend millions on market research, on testing, on pilot programs. Why? Because they're buying information. They're paying for data that tells them what works and what doesn't. They don't consider that money wasted when the data shows something won't work. They consider it money well spent because now they know what not to pursue. You should think the same way. When you take a calculated risk and it doesn't pan out, you just paid for data. You learned something about that market, that strategy, that approach, that industry. You learned something about yourself, your capabilities, your preferences, your tolerance for different types of stress. That knowledge has value, real value, because it informs every future decision you make. Failure teaches what success can't. Here's something counterintuitive. You learn more from things that don't work than from things that do. And when something succeeds, you learn that this approach can work. That's useful. But you don't always know why it worked. Was it your strategy? Was it timing? Was it luck? Success can teach you to repeat what you did, but it doesn't always teach you to understand what you did. Failure teaches you cause and effect. When something doesn't work, you're forced to figure out why. You have to analyze what went wrong. You have to identify which assumptions failed. You have to separate what you controlled from what you didn't. That analytical process builds judgment, real judgment, the kind that makes your future decisions smarter. I've watched this play out countless times. Someone takes their first investment risk. Maybe they buy a stock instead of a diversified fund. Maybe they invest right before a market dip. The value drops. They feel like they failed. But when they review the outcome in their register, when they analyze what actually happened, they learn. They learn that individual stocks are volatile. They learn that timing the market is hard. They learn that their emotional response to seeing red numbers was stronger than they expected. They learn that diversification matters. And then their next investment decision is smarter. Not because the first one succeeded, but because it didn't. The failure taught them things success wouldn't have. The failure spiral versus the learning loop. Here's where most people go wrong. They take a risk, it doesn't work out, and they spiral. They tell themselves they're not good at this. They tell themselves they should have been more careful. They tell themselves this proves they were right to be afraid. That's the failure spiral. And it keeps you stuck forever. The learning loop looks different. You take a risk. It doesn't work out. You feel disappointed. That's normal. But then you sit down with your register, you review your entry, you document what happened and what you learned. You identify what you do differently. You recognize what was in your control and what wasn't, and then you plan the next attempt with better information. That's the loop. Try, learn, adjust, try again. That's how skill is built. That's how wealth is built, not by avoiding failure, but by systematically learning from it. And here's what makes the calculated risk register so powerful. It forces you into the learning loop. It makes the spiral impossible because you've documented your thinking. You can see clearly what worked, what didn't, and why. You can't lie to yourself about what happened. The data is right there. Separating outcome from quality. This is crucial and most people never get it. A good decision can have a bad outcome. A bad decision can have a good outcome. The two are not the same. If you invest based on solid research, with proper diversification, with a long-term time horizon, and the market drops 20% the next month, that's a bad outcome from a good decision. You didn't do anything wrong. The market just moved against you short-term. If you put your life savings on a single speculative stock without research because your cousin had a hot tip and it doubles in value, that's a good outcome from a bad decision. You got lucky. The process was terrible even if the result was positive. Your job isn't to judge yourself based on outcomes. Your job is to make consistently good decisions. Over time, good decisions lead to good outcomes more often than not, but any single outcome can go either way. That's why you document your analysis before you know the outcome, so you can evaluate the quality of your decision-making separate from the result. So you can learn from the process, not just the outcome. When you do this, when you separate the two, failure stops being devastating. Because you can look at a failed outcome and say, the decision process was sound. The assumptions were reasonable. It just didn't work out this time. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'll adjust. That's maturity. That's how professionals think, and it keeps you moving forward instead of retreating into fear. The compound effect of learning. Here's the real power of treating failure as data. Learning compounds just like money does. Every failed attempt teaches you something. That learning makes the next attempt smarter. That smarter attempt, even if it also fails, teaches you more. That additional learning makes the next attempt even smarter. Over time, you're not just accumulating failures, you're accumulating wisdom. And that wisdom shows up in your results. Your success rate increases, not because you're getting luckier, but because you're getting better. You're making more informed decisions. You're avoiding mistakes you've already learned from. You're applying lessons from one area to others. The person who's taken 20 calculated risks has learned from all 20. Even if only 12 worked out, they're vastly more capable than the person who's taken 2 risks and had both succeed. Because the first person has 20 data points, they've built real judgment, they've developed pattern recognition, they've proven to themselves they can handle different outcomes. That's worth more than a clean record with limited experience. Rewriting your failure stories. Here's an exercise. Think about something you tried in the past that didn't work out, something you consider a failure. Now answer these questions. What did you learn from that experience? What do you know now that you didn't know before? How did it change your approach to similar situations? What skills did you develop while trying? What would your life look like if you'd never tried? When you answer honestly, you'll probably realize that failure taught you something valuable. It gave you experience you still use. It shaped how you think about decisions. It proved you could survive trying something and not having it work perfectly. That's not failure, that's education. Expensive education, maybe, but education. Now, what if you'd approached it with the calculated risk register mindset? From the start, what if you'd documented your analysis, defined your success criteria, and planned to learn regardless of outcome? You'd have extracted even more value from the experience. You'd have the data documented. You'd have evidence of your growth. That's the difference. Not whether you fail, whether you intentionally learn from it. The permission to fail forward. I'm going to say something that might feel strange. You have permission to fail, not permission to be reckless, not permission to avoid thinking. Permission to try things that might not work. Most people never give themselves that permission. They hold themselves to an impossible standard. They expect themselves to succeed at everything, especially things they've never done before. And that expectation keeps them from trying anything. But you don't need to be perfect. You need to be persistent. You need to be willing to learn. You need to be honest about what works and what doesn't. And you need to keep moving. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the path to success. The only way to avoid failure completely is to never try anything. And that's not safety. That's stagnation. So here's what I want you to understand. Every entry in your calculated risk register, regardless of outcome, is a win. Because every entry represents you taking control of your financial future. Every entry represents you acting despite fear. Every entry represents you gathering real data about what works for you. Some will work out better than others. That's life, that's investing, that's business, that's everything worth doing. But all of them move you forward if you're learning from them. The expensive data isn't the problem. Not collecting it is the problem. Not using it is the problem. Letting one bad outcome convince you to stop trying, that's the real problem. Building failure immunity. Here's what happens when you consistently use the calculated risk register and treat failure as data. You develop what I call failure immunity. Not fearlessness, immunity. You stop being devastated by things not working out. You stop personalizing poor outcomes. You stop letting one bad result define your capability. Because you have evidence, documented evidence that you've tried multiple things, learned from all of them, and kept moving. You can see your improvement. You can track how your decision-making has gotten sharper. You can measure how your success rate has increased as you've applied lessons. That evidence makes you immune to the spiral. Bad outcomes still feel disappointing. But they don't stop you. They don't define you. They don't convince you you're incapable. They just add to your data. They inform your next decision. They make you smarter, and then you move forward. That's the freedom the calculated risk register creates. Not freedom from failure. Freedom to fail without it destroying you. Freedom to treat every outcome as useful information. And once you have that freedom, once you're immune to failure in that way, there's almost nothing you can't accomplish. Because you're not limited by fear anymore. You're not paralyzed by the possibility of things not working perfectly. You're just learning, adjusting, and moving forward. Consistently. Systematically. Building wealth through accumulated attempts, not perfect ones. That's how people who seem to come from nowhere build significant wealth. Not because they're smarter or luckier, because they tried more, failed more, learned more, and kept going when others stopped. The failure isn't expensive. The learning from failure is priceless. And the people who understand that difference win. Chapter 7. Tracking wins and lessons equally. Most people only track their wins. They remember the investments that performed well. They celebrate the moves that worked out. They highlight the decisions that led to positive outcomes. And they try to forget everything else. That's backwards. That's how you stay stuck in the same patterns. Because if you only study your successes, you only learn what worked. You don't learn why things didn't work. You don't identify patterns in your failures. You don't develop the full picture of your decision-making. Real growth requires tracking everything, the wins and the losses, the successes and the setbacks, the brilliant moves and the mistakes, all of it. Because the complete picture is what teaches you who you are as a decision maker and how to get better. That's what this chapter is about, building a system that captures both sides equally, not to dwell on failure, to learn from the full range of your experience. Why equal tracking matters. When you only record wins, you create what psychologists call survivorship bias. You see what worked and assume it will keep working. You repeat the same strategies without understanding the context that made them successful. You think you're smarter than you are because you're only looking at the highlights. But wealth isn't built on highlights. It's built on consistency, on making more good decisions than bad ones over long periods, on learning from everything and adjusting based on complete information. When you track losses equally with wins, you get that complete information. You can see patterns in what doesn't work just as clearly as patterns in what does. You can identify your blind spots. You can recognize when you're repeating mistakes. You can separate luck from skill. Let me give you an example. Someone invests in 3 different opportunities. 2 do well. 1 fails completely. If they only track and celebrate the 2 wins, they'll think their strategy is solid. They'll repeat it. But if the 3rd failure happened because they ignored a critical warning sign, and they don't track and analyze that failure, they'll make the same mistake again. Meanwhile, someone else makes the same 3 investments and tracks all 3. They celebrate the wins, yes, but they also dig into the failure. They identify the warning sign they missed. They adjust their criteria for future decisions. Now their strategy is truly solid because it includes the lesson from the failure. Who do you think makes better decisions going forward? Who do you think builds more wealth over time? The person with complete data. Always. The balanced register. Your calculated risk register should have equal space for success and setback, equal detail, equal analysis. You're not trying to focus on the positive. You're trying to capture the truth. For every entry, whether it worked out or not, you come back and fill in the same sections. Actual outcome. What actually happened? Specific numbers, specific results. Don't editorialize, just state facts. Investment returned 8% in 1 year. Business generated $300 in revenue over 3 months. Career move resulted in $5,000 salary increase, but longer commute and higher stress. Success level achieved. Remember those 3 success levels you defined? Which did you hit? Minimum, target, or exceptional? Or did you fall short of even minimum? Be honest. This isn't about judgment. It's about calibration. You're learning what level of performance your decisions typically produce. Lessons learned. This is the big one. What did this experience teach you? What do you know now that you didn't know before? What surprised you? What would you do differently? What would you do the same? Write this section with as much detail as your original analysis, because this is where the value lives. This is what makes the entire exercise worthwhile. The lesson is the return on investment regardless of financial outcome. Assumption. Check. Go back to the assumptions you listed. Which ones held true? Which ones didn't? This is huge for improving your judgment. Over time, you'll see which types of assumptions you make that tend to be accurate and which types are consistently wrong. That pattern recognition makes you smarter. Emotional response. How did you feel during this process? What emotions showed up? Did you panic during a downturn? Did you get overconfident after an early win? Did you doubt yourself more than the situation warranted? Tracking this matters because emotional patterns repeat. If you don't identify them, you can't manage them. Next steps. Based on what you learned, what's your next move? Is it to try again with adjustments? Is it to apply these lessons to a different opportunity? Is it to avoid this type of situation in the future? Every experience should inform your next decision. Fill all of this out regardless of whether you're documenting a win or a loss. In fact, spend more time on the losses. They usually have more to teach you. The 30-60-90 review. Here's a practice that separates serious wealth builders from everyone else. Regular review of your register. Every 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on the pace of your actions, sit down and read through all your entries, not just once when you complete them. Regularly, you're looking for patterns. What types of risks do you consistently avoid? What types do you take? Which ones tend to work out? Which don't? Are you repeating the same mistakes? Are you applying lessons from one area to another? Is your success rate improving? Is your confidence growing? This review process does something powerful. It shows you your growth. You can see yourself getting better at evaluation, better at execution, better at learning. That visible improvement reinforces the behavior. It proves the system works. It motivates you to keep going. It also shows you where you're stuck. Maybe you keep avoiding a certain type of opportunity even though your analysis says you should pursue it. That's valuable information. You can dig into that resistance. You can address it directly. Or maybe you keep making the same type of mistake. You're not learning the lesson. The review catches that. It makes the pattern visible so you can break it. Without regular review, your register's just a log. With regular review, it becomes a growth tool, a mirror that shows you clearly who you are as a decision maker and how you're evolving. Celebrating. Both. Here's something people get wrong. They think celebrating wins and analyzing losses are opposite activities. They're not. You should do both, for both. When something works out, celebrate it. Acknowledge your good decision-making. Recognize that you took a risk, managed it well, and got a positive result. That reinforcement matters. It builds confidence. It creates positive associations with calculated risk-taking. But also analyze the win. Don't just accept it and move on. Figure out why it worked. What did you do right? What context made it successful? Can you repeat this? What does this teach you? When something doesn't work out, analyze it thoroughly, extract every lesson, but also acknowledge that you tried. Recognize that you took action. Give yourself credit for being someone who moves forward despite uncertainty. That matters. That's worth acknowledging. The emotion around wins and losses should be balanced too. Don't be devastated by failure or euphoric about success. Stay even. Stay analytical. Feel the feelings, but don't let them dominate your evaluation. Because here's the truth. Both outcomes are just data. Both teach you. Both move you forward if you let them. Sharing selectively. Most people share their wins and hide their losses. That's natural. But it's also limiting. Consider sharing both in your register. Not with everyone. Not on social media. But with someone you trust who's also working on building wealth. A partner, a friend, a mentor. When you can talk openly about what didn't work, when you can analyze failures without shame, you learn faster. You get outside perspective. You realize you're not alone in struggling. You normalize the experience of trying and sometimes failing. And when you share wins, you get to celebrate with someone who understands the work that went into it, who knows it wasn't luck, who recognizes you pushed through fear to take that risk. This selective sharing makes the whole process more sustainable. You're not hiding half your experience. You're building it into a complete narrative of someone who takes action, learns from everything, and keeps growing. The long-term pattern. Here's what you'll see if you maintain your register consistently for a year or more. A clear upward trend. Your early entries will show hesitation, basic mistakes, incomplete analysis. That's fine. That's where everyone starts. Your middle entries will show improvement, better questions, more thorough analysis, more accurate assumptions, lessons from earlier entries being applied. Your later entries will show confidence, sophisticated evaluation, quick identification of good and bad risks, higher success rates, but also bigger risks, bigger potential returns, bigger lessons. That progression, that visible growth, is worth more than any single successful investment because it shows you're not getting lucky, you're getting better. And someone who's consistently getting better eventually outperforms everyone who's just trying to avoid mistakes. The register makes that progression visible. It turns invisible growth into concrete evidence. It proves to you that you're not the same decision maker you were 6 months ago or a year ago. And that proof, that evidence of your own improvement, creates unstoppable momentum. Because now you know with certainty that you can learn, grow, and build wealth systematically. The psychological shift. When you track wins and lessons equally, when you treat every outcome as valuable data, something shifts psychologically. You stop fearing failure, because failure isn't separate from success anymore. It's part of the same process. It's equally valuable. It's just teaching you different things. You stop needing every decision to work out perfectly, because you know you're learning from all of them. Your identity isn't tied to your success rate. It's tied to your learning rate. And that freedom, the freedom to try without needing to be right every time, is what allows you to take the risks that build real wealth, the big moves, the unconventional opportunities, the decisions that require courage. Because you're not protecting a perfect record, you're building a learning record. And that's sustainable, that's powerful, that lasts. So track it all, the wins, the losses, everything in between. Give equal attention to what worked and what didn't. Learn from the complete picture. That's how you build judgment. That's how you build confidence. That's how you build wealth that lasts, because it's built on real skill, not luck. Your register isn't a highlight reel. It's a complete record of someone learning to make better decisions. And that complete record is what turns you from someone who occasionally gets lucky into someone who consistently builds wealth. Chapter 8. The 5% Rule. Risking what you can afford to learn from. Here's something that stops people cold. They don't know how much risk is appropriate. They either play it so safe they never build anything, or they go all in and create real danger for themselves. Both extremes keep you poor. What you need is a framework, a way to determine how much risk makes sense for your situation, a rule that lets you take meaningful action without creating catastrophic vulnerability. That's what this chapter is about. The 5% Rule. It's simple, it's flexible, and it's one of the most powerful wealth-building principles I've ever seen. Here's how it works. You never risk more than 5% of your liquid net worth on any single calculated risk. Never. No matter how good it looks, no matter how confident you feel, 5% maximum. That's it. That's the rule. Let me show you why this changes everything. The math of manageable risk. First, let's talk about what 5% actually means. If you have $10,000 in liquid assets, 5% is $500. That's your maximum single risk exposure. If you have $50,000, it's $2,500. If you have $100,000, it's $5,000. This might feel small, especially if you're looking at opportunities that require more. But here's why this number is magic. You can afford to be wrong 20 times in a row before you've lost everything. 20 times. Do you understand how powerful that is? You get 20 swings, 20 chances to learn, 20 opportunities to take calculated risks and extract lessons. Nobody's judgment is so bad that they fail 20 consecutive times if they're learning from each one. It's almost impossible. Which means the 5% rule essentially removes catastrophic risk while keeping meaningful upside on the table. Let's look at it another way. If you take 20 different risks at 5% each and only 5 of them work out, you'll probably come out ahead. Because you only need each successful move to return more than 20% to break even on the losses. And many wealth-building opportunities return far more than that. But even if you break even financially, you've gained experience from 20 attempts. You've built judgment, you've developed skills, you've learned what works in your context. That knowledge is worth far more than the cost of tuition. Why not more? I know what some of you are thinking. If I really believe in something, why wouldn't I bet more? Why wouldn't I risk 10% or 20% or even 50% on my best idea? Because you're human. And humans are terrible at knowing which ideas are actually their best ones. What feels like your strongest conviction right now might be your worst idea in retrospect. You can't know in advance. Nobody can. That's why successful investors diversify. That's why smart wealth builders spread their risk. The 5% rule protects you from yourself, from overconfidence, from the times you're sure you're right but you're actually wrong. And there will be those times, for everyone, including you. I've seen people lose years of savings betting. Big on something they were certain about. Maybe it was a business they were convinced would work. Maybe it was a property they were sure would appreciate. Maybe it was a stock they thought couldn't lose. And they weren't stupid. They weren't reckless. They were confident. They'd done research. They believed in their analysis. But they were wrong. And because they bet too much, that one wrong decision set them back significantly. Compare that to someone who follows the 5% rule. When they're wrong, they lose 5% and learn. They adjust. They try again. One bad decision doesn't destroy their progress. It just teaches them something. Why not less? On the flip side, some people think they should risk even less, 1%, 0.5%. But that creates a different problem. The risk becomes meaningless. If you have $50,000 and you invest $500, you're not really taking a risk. Yes, you could lose that $500, but it won't teach you much about managing risk because there's no real pressure. You won't feel the emotions. You won't learn to handle uncertainty in a meaningful way. The learning happens when there's something at stake, not everything, but something that matters. 5% is usually enough to matter without being enough to devastate. It's also enough to produce meaningful returns. If that 5% doubles, you've just made 5% on your total net worth. That's significant. Do that a few times and you've made real progress. So 5% sits in the sweet spot, enough to matter, not enough to destroy you. Adjusting for your situation. Now, 5% is the rule, but context matters. Let me give you some guidance on when you might adjust. If you're just starting out, if your liquid net worth is very small, let's say under $5,000, you might need to think in different terms. 5% of $3,000 is $150. Can you learn to invest or start a business with $150? Maybe not effectively. In that case, you might allow yourself to go slightly higher, maybe 10%, but only until you hit $10,000 or so in liquid assets. The key is you're acknowledging this is temporary. You're not making it your permanent pattern. If you have dependents, if you have people counting on you financially, you might want to be more conservative. Maybe 3% instead of 5%. That's fine. The principle is the same. You're just being appropriately cautious given your responsibilities. If you're closer to retirement, if your timeline is shorter, if you can't recover easily from losses, again, maybe you go to 3% or even 2%. The framework still works. You're just adjusting for your specific situation. The core principle remains. Never risk so much that one failed decision sets you back significantly. Always risk enough that success means something and failure teaches you something real. Applying the rule across categories. The 5% rule applies to all categories of calculated risk. Investments, business ventures, education and skill development, career moves that involve financial risk. For investments, it's straightforward. You invest no more than 5% of your liquid net worth in any single stock, property, or opportunity. This naturally creates diversification. You can't put all your eggs in one basket if each basket can only hold 5%. For business ventures, think about your total capital at risk. If you're starting a side business, add up all the costs, setup, marketing, inventory, whatever. That total should be 5% or less of your liquid net worth, not 5% per month, total exposure. For education, same thing. If you're paying for a course or certification or degree that will increase your earnings, the total cost should fit within 5%. If it doesn't, you finance it through income over time, not by depleting savings. For career moves, it's trickier because you're not usually risking capital directly. But you might be leaving income. You might be taking a position with less security but more upside. Think about the downside. If this doesn't work out, what's your financial exposure? That should fit within 5% of your safety net. Stacking versus concentration. Here's something important. The 5% rule is per opportunity, not total. You can have multiple 5% risks running simultaneously. In fact, you should. If you have $50,000 in liquid net worth, you could have 5 different 2,500 investments or ventures going at once. That's 12,000 if you even total 25% of your net worth, but it's spread across 5 different opportunities. That's smart diversification. You're not concentrated. No single failure hurts you significantly, and you're learning from multiple experiences simultaneously. What you can't do is put $2,500 into 5 different things that are essentially the same risk. 5 different stocks in the same sector, that's concentration, not diversification. 5 different rental properties in the same neighborhood, same thing. Real diversification means different types of risk, different asset classes, different time horizons, different dependencies, so that when one area struggles, others might thrive. The psychological benefit beyond the math, the 5% rule does something crucial psychologically. It removes the all or nothing pressure. When you know you're only risking 5%, you can take that risk without your hands shaking. You can handle watching it play out without panic. You can make rational decisions during the process because you're not catastrophizing. That calm allows you to actually learn from the experience. Your emotional reaction doesn't overwhelm your analytical capacity. You can observe what's happening, adjust if needed, and extract lessons regardless of outcome. Compare that to someone who bet 50% on something. They're terrified. Every fluctuation feels devastating. They can't think clearly. They're more likely to panic sell or make emotional decisions that compound their problems. And they're so stressed that even if it works out, they don't enjoy it or learn from it effectively. The 5% rule keeps you in the learning zone, challenged but not Overwhelmed, engaged, but not panicked. That's where growth happens. When to break the rule. I said the rule is never risk more than 5%. Let me be more precise. There's exactly one exception. When you're investing in yourself through skill development that has clear, immediate ROI, and you have no other way to finance it. And even then, you'd better be damn sure about the return. For example, if you have a job offer that requires a certification, and getting that certification costs $3,000, more than 5% of your $50,000, and the job pays significantly more, that might be worth stretching the rule. Because you're not really risking the money, you're investing it with a clear return path. But that's rare. And you'd better document the hell out of it in your register, including why you're breaking your own rule and what safeguards you have. For everything else, stick to 5%. The rule exists to protect you. Respect it. Building up. Here's the beautiful part about the 5% rule. As you build wealth, your 5% gets bigger. Start with $10,000, your 5% is $500. Build that up to $50,000, now it's $2,500. Get to $100,000, it's $5,000. Reach $500,000, it's $25,000. Your ability to take meaningful risks scales with your success. You're not stuck at small numbers forever. But you also never risk so much that one failure sets you back to square one. This creates a sustainable growth path. You take appropriate risks for your level. You learn. You grow your assets. Your appropriate risk level increases. You take slightly bigger risks. You learn more. You grow more. It's a reinforcing cycle, and it all stays manageable because you're never overextended. You're never one bad decision away from disaster. The register connection. The 5% rule integrates perfectly with your calculated risk register. When you're evaluating a potential risk, one of your first questions should be, does this fit within my 5% threshold? If it doesn't, you don't immediately dismiss it, but you do need to restructure it. Can you take a smaller position? Can you split it across multiple time periods? Can you find partners to share the risk? If you can't make it fit within 5%, and it's not the clear exception I mentioned, then you document in your register why you're not pursuing it. Opportunity exceeded 5% rule. Decided to wait until net worth increases. That's not failure. That's discipline. And documenting it matters because it shows you're following your system even when it means passing on opportunities. Over time, you'll see entries where you passed on something because it was too big. And later, when your net worth increased, you were able to pursue similar opportunities within the 5% framework. That shows growth. That shows patience. That shows the system working. Teaching others. When you share your wealth-building approach with others, the 5% rule is one of the easiest principles to communicate. It's simple, it's clear, it's flexible enough to work for almost anyone. You can explain it in 2 minutes. And people immediately understand why it makes sense. It removes the mystery from how much risk should I take. It gives them a clear framework. And when people around you are following the same principle, you can support each other. You can discuss opportunities within the framework. You can hold each other accountable to staying within your limits. The long-term impact. Follow the 5% rule for 5 years, 10 years, and here's what happens. You take dozens or hundreds of calculated risks. Some work beautifully, some don't. But none of them destroy you. All of them teach you. All of them contribute to your growing judgment and capability. Your net worth increases not because you made one perfect bet, but because you made many good decisions and learned from the mediocre ones. Your wealth compounds not just from returns, but from accumulated wisdom. And you develop something rare, the ability to take significant risks without fear. Not because you're reckless, but because you know you're protected. You know the 5% rule means you can afford to be wrong. You can afford to try. That's freedom. Real freedom. Not the freedom to never make mistakes. The freedom to make mistakes without them destroying your financial future. And that freedom allows you to build wealth faster than people who are either too cautious or too reckless. Because you're consistently in action, consistently learning, consistently protected. The 5% rule isn't just a risk management tool. It's a wealth-building accelerator. Use it. Chapter 9. Speed kills paralysis. Here's something I see all the time. People who know what to do, know how much risk is appropriate, have documented their analysis in their register, and still don't move. They're stuck in one last cycle of delay. They tell themselves they need to think about it more. They want to review their analysis one more time. They're waiting for the right moment. They're going to start soon. Definitely soon. And weeks pass, months pass, the opportunity changes or disappears, and they're still almost ready. This chapter is about breaking that final trap, because knowledge without speed is just sophisticated procrastination. The window problem. Opportunities have windows, that's a fact. Not all opportunities, but most of the good ones. The right property at the right price doesn't stay on the market forever. The job opening doesn't wait for you to finish deliberating. The investment opportunity at current valuations won't last indefinitely. And yet people treat these time-sensitive situations as if they have unlimited time to decide. They operate on their timeline, not the opportunity's timeline. This creates a pattern. By the time they feel ready, the moment has passed, so they never actually execute. They just analyze opportunities that are no longer available. And then they wonder why they can't get ahead. Speed matters, not reckless speed, not uninformed action. But once you've done your analysis, once you've documented your thinking in your register, once you've verified it fits within your 5% rule, you need to move fast. How fast? 48 hours or less from decision to first action. The 48-hour rule. Here's the rule. Once you've completed your register entry and decided to move forward, you must take the first concrete action within 48 hours. Not think about taking action. Not plan to take action. Actually do something that moves the opportunity forward. For an investment, that might be funding your account or placing the order. For a business, that might be registering the business name or reaching out to your first potential client. For a career move, that might be submitting your application or having the conversation with your boss. It doesn't have to be the complete execution. It has to be irreversible momentum, something that makes backing out harder than continuing. Why 48 hours? Because that's about how long your rational decision-making stays stronger than your fear. After that, doubt starts creeping back in. Your brain starts finding new reasons to delay. The initial clarity you had during your analysis starts to fade. 48 hours keeps you in the window where your documented logic is still fresh and your commitment is still strong. It doesn't give fear time to rebuild its case. It forces you to move while you still have courage. Analysis, paralysis versus strategic thinking. People confuse these. They think if they're thinking, they're making progress. But there's a massive difference between strategic thinking and analysis paralysis. Strategic thinking has an end point. You identify what you need to know, you gather that information, you make a decision, you act. It's directional, it moves toward execution. Analysis paralysis has no end point. You keep gathering information not because you need it, but because it delays the decision. You keep thinking not because it's productive, but because it's safer than acting. It circles. It goes nowhere. How do you tell the difference? Ask yourself, if I spent another week on this, what new information would I gain that would actually change my decision? If you can't answer that specifically, you're in paralysis, not strategy. Ask yourself, what's the real reason I haven't moved yet? If the answer is some version of I don't feel ready, that's paralysis. If the answer is, I'm waiting for a specific data point that will be available on date, that might be strategy. Ask yourself, have I already made this same decision in my register? If yes, and you're still not moving, that's paralysis. Your register already gave you the answer. You're just refusing to accept it. The activation energy problem. In chemistry, activation energy is the minimum energy needed to start a reaction. Even when a reaction will ultimately release energy, it needs that initial push to begin. The same concept applies to action. Even when taking action will ultimately feel good, when it will relieve your stress, create momentum, and move you forward, you need that initial push to overcome inertia. And here's the key. The activation energy needed to start is way higher than the energy needed to continue. Starting is the hard part. Once you're in motion, staying in motion is relatively easy. That's why the 48-hour rule is so powerful. It forces you to pay the activation energy cost while you still have the power to do it. It gets you into motion before the cost feels too high. Think about every time you've started something you were avoiding. Maybe it was a difficult conversation, a complex project, a risky decision. How did you feel once you started compared to how you felt while avoiding it? Almost always, starting felt better. The anxiety of avoidance was worse than the experience of doing the thing. But you couldn't know that until you paid the activation energy and started. The 48-hour rule ensures you pay that cost consistently, before fear can rebuild the barrier too high to cross. Small first steps. The first action doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be the complete execution. It just needs to be real. Sometimes the best first action is the smallest viable step. For an investment, that might be logging into your brokerage account. For a business, that might be drafting one email. For a career move, that might be opening the application form. These seem trivial, but they're not. They break inertia. They create psychological momentum. They shift you from considering to executing. And once you've taken that first step, the second is easier. You're already in motion. You're already committed. The barrier to the next action is lower. This is why successful people often talk about eating the frog, doing the hardest thing first. But I'd modify that slightly. Do the first thing first. Don't worry about whether it's the hardest. Just make it impossible not to continue. Momentum compounds. Speed creates momentum. Momentum creates more momentum. This compounds just like money does. When you move fast on one decision, you build a pattern. Your brain learns, this is how we operate now. The next decision becomes easier to move on because you've established a rhythm. When you take action quickly and survive, which you will because you're following your risk framework, you gain evidence. Evidence that speed doesn't equal disaster. Evidence that you can trust your analysis. Evidence that you're capable of executing even when uncertain. That evidence accumulates. And accumulated evidence of capability creates confidence, not fake confidence, real confidence built on proof. People wonder how some individuals seem so decisive, so quick to act. It's not that they're naturally that way. They've built the pattern through repetition. They've proven to themselves hundreds of times that fast action based on reasonable analysis works. So now it feels normal. You can build the same pattern. But it starts with forcing yourself to move fast on the first few decisions, to push through the discomfort, to prove that speed works. After 10 fast executions, it's easier. After 20, it's natural. After 50, you wonder why you ever moved slowly. The opportunity cost of delay. Every day you delay after making your decision costs you. If you've decided to invest and you wait a month, that's a month of potential returns you'll never get back. If you've decided to start a business and you wait 6 months, that's 6 months of learning and revenue you've foregone. If you've decided to make a career move and you wait a year, that's a year of higher income you've lost. And it's not just the direct cost, it's the compound effect. That missed month of returns would have generated returns in the following months. That missed 6 months of business learning would have made the next 6 months more productive. That year of higher income would have allowed you to take the next risk faster. Time is your most valuable asset in wealth building, not because you need to rush recklessly, because you need to maximize your learning cycles. The faster you execute, learn, and adjust, the more cycles you complete. The more cycles you complete, the more you grow. Slow, deliberate action beats fast, reckless action, but fast, deliberate action beats everything. Creating forcing functions. Sometimes you need external pressure to ensure speed. These are called forcing functions, structures that make action necessary. One approach: tell someone your decision and when you'll execute it. I'm going to invest $2,000 in index funds by Friday. Now you have social accountability. Backing out means admitting you didn't follow through. Another approach: set a financial forcing function. If you're starting a business, pay for something non-refundable. A website domain, business cards, something that creates sunk cost. Now stopping means losing money. That pressure pushes you forward. Another approach: make the decision public in some way, not to brag, to commit. Post on social media that you're starting something. Tell your team you're making a change. File the paperwork. Do something that makes the decision harder to reverse than to continue. These might feel uncomfortable. That's the point. They're supposed to. They're supposed to make the comfort of delay less accessible. They're supposed to push you into motion. Use them strategically. Use them when you know you're right but you're struggling to move. Use them to create the activation energy you need. When fast becomes reckless, I need to be clear about something. Speed after analysis is good. Speed instead of analysis is stupid. The 48-hour rule applies after you've done your register entry. After you've thought through the opportunity, documented the risks and potential returns, verified it fits your framework, and made a clear decision. If you skip those steps and just move fast, you're not being decisive. You're being impulsive. And impulsive action leads to preventable mistakes. So the wait sequence matters. Identify opportunity. Complete register entry. Verify it fits within risk framework. Make decision, move within 48 hours. Don't skip steps 1-4 to get to step 5 faster, but don't let steps 1-4 become an endless loop that prevents step 5. There's a balance, fast after thoughtful, decisive after deliberate. That's the combination that builds wealth. The speed mindset. Ultimately, this is about identity. Are you someone who thinks about doing things, or are you someone who does things? The people who build significant wealth are doers. They have biases toward action. They'd rather try and adjust than plan and delay. They understand that real-world feedback beats theoretical analysis. That mindset isn't innate, it's developed. You develop it by forcing yourself to move fast until moving fast becomes normal. Start today. Look at your register. Do you have any entries where you decided to move forward but haven't taken action yet? Take that action today. Right now if possible. Within 48 hours at most, start building the pattern. Start proving to yourself that you can be someone who moves, someone who executes, someone who doesn't let opportunities slip away while you're still thinking about them. Because here's the truth. Every day you delay is a day someone else is taking the action you're considering. They might have less knowledge, less preparation, less analysis than you. But they're moving. And movement beats perfection. You don't have to be reckless. You just have to be faster than you've been. Fast enough that opportunities don't pass you by. Fast enough that learning cycles happen in months, not years. Fast enough that your fear doesn't get a chance to rebuild between decision and action. That's how you win. Not by being smarter than everyone else, by being slightly smarter and significantly faster. Speed kills paralysis. And paralysis has been killing your financial future long enough. So here we are. You've got the complete framework, the calculated risk register, the 5% rule, the 48-hour execution window. The mindset shifts about failure, fear, and perfectionism. Now there's only one question left. What are you going to do? Because everything we've covered is useless if it stays theoretical. Everything I've taught you means nothing if you close this and go back to the same patterns that kept you stuck before. You don't need more information. You need different behavior. And different behavior starts with one decision, right now, not tomorrow, not after you think about it, now. So let me be direct with you one last time. Fear of failure has cost you enough. You know this. Maybe it's cost you tens of thousands in missed investment returns. Maybe it's cost you years of staying in a situation that limits you. Maybe it's cost you the confidence that comes from trying things and proving you can handle the results. Whatever it's cost, the bill stops here. Today. Because you now have something most people never get. A systematic way to evaluate risk, take action, and learn from every outcome. The calculated risk register isn't magic. It's just disciplined thinking written down. But that discipline, that commitment to evaluating opportunities honestly, tracking results accurately, and learning from everything, that changes your entire trajectory. You're not going to become fearless. Fear is part of being human. But you can become someone who acts despite fear. Someone who treats fear as information, not instruction. Someone who moves forward even when the voice in your head is screaming to stay still. The difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't one big decision. It's a series of small, calculated decisions made consistently. It's the accumulation of risks taken, lessons learned, and adjustments made. You don't build wealth by hitting one home run. You build it by getting on base repeatedly, by taking your swings, by learning what works for you through real experience, not theoretical research. And the beautiful thing about the system you now have, it protects you while you learn. The 5% rule ensures no single failure can set you back significantly. The register ensures you learn from every attempt. The 48-hour rule ensures fear doesn't regain control. So here's what I want you to do. Before you do anything else, before you move on with your day, before you let this information settle into the category of good ideas I'll implement later, open a document, start your register, make your first entry, pick something you've been considering, something that matters to you, something you've researched but haven't acted on, and document it. Complete the analysis, make your decision, and if you're moving forward, take your first action within 48 hours. That's it. That's how this stops being information and becomes transformation. Because transformation doesn't happen when you understand something. It happens when you do something different. You understand now how fear works, how your brain treats opportunity like danger, how perfectionism is just expensive procrastination, how failure is valuable data, how calculated risk, protected by sensible limits and tracked honestly, is the only way regular people build extraordinary wealth. You understand it. Now prove you believe it. Take the first risk. Document it, learn from it, take the next one, build the pattern, build the proof, build the track record that rewrites your relationship with uncertainty. 6 months from now, you can be someone with a register full of evidence that you're capable of evaluating risk and taking action. Someone with real experience making decisions under uncertainty. Someone who's learned what works for you through doing, not through reading. Or you can be someone who understood the concepts but never applied them. Someone who meant to start but kept delaying. Someone who stayed stuck while time kept moving. That choice is yours, but only for the next 48 hours. After that, if you haven't taken action, you've already chosen. You've chosen to let fear win again. Don't let that happen. You've spent enough time afraid, enough time planning, enough time preparing, enough time staying safe while opportunity passes you by. The fear of failure isn't protecting you. It's robbing you of experience, of growth, of the wealth you could build if you were willing to try, fail, learn, and try again. The world doesn't reward perfect planning. It rewards smart action. It rewards people who move when others hesitate, who learn when others avoid, who build when others prepare. Be one of those people. Not someday. Today. Your financial future isn't waiting for you to feel ready. It's waiting for you to be ready. And you are. You have everything you need. You have the framework. You have the system. You have the knowledge. All that's missing is the decision to use it, so make that decision. Right now. Commit to creating your first register entry today. Commit to taking your first calculated risk this week. Commit to building evidence that you can do this, because you can, not perfectly, not without mistakes, not without setbacks, but you can learn to evaluate risk accurately. You can learn to act despite fear. You can learn to build wealth systematically. Thousands of people less smart than you, less educated than you, with fewer advantages than you have done exactly this. They didn't wait for fearlessness. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They didn't wait until they were sure. They calculated their risk. They protected themselves with sensible limits. They documented their thinking. And they moved. And because they moved, they learned. And because they learned, they improved. And because they improved, they succeeded. Not every time, but enough times. Enough to build something real. Enough to change their trajectory. Enough to prove that calculated risk-taking works. You can have that same trajectory. Starting today. Starting with one entry in your register, one documented decision, one action taken despite fear. That's all it takes to begin. One honest assessment of one real opportunity, one commitment to move within 48 hours, one proof point that you're capable of more than playing it safe, and then another, and then another. Until calculated risk-taking becomes who you are, not something you're working up courage to try. Until your register is full of evidence that you can handle uncertainty. Until your bank account reflects the cumulative effect of smart decisions made consistently. Until your confidence comes from proof, not hope. That future is available, right now, today, but only if you start. So start, make your first entry, take your first action. Begin building the evidence that you're someone who overcomes the fear of failure by treating failure as expensive data and learning as the real return on investment. Your future is waiting. It's time to move.